The lake had always been more than a stretch of water to me. It was a living memory of my family's devotion and quiet perseverance. Each morning I woke to the soft lapping of waves against the weathered dock, and the cry of distant loons echoing across the mist. The pine trees formed a protective circle around the water, their needles releasing a sharp, clean scent that greeted me when I stepped outside. I spent slow hours fishing in the early light, watching sunlight filter through drifting fog, and tending to the old stone dam my great-grandfather had built by hand. It wasn't a lavish life, but it held a kind of wealth that couldn't be counted: privacy, tradition, and an unbroken rhythm with the seasons. Neighbors were few and far between, mostly retired couples who understood the unspoken rule of quiet respect for the land. Wildlife roamed freely: deer grazing at the shoreline, turtles sunning on fallen logs, herons gliding low over the water. Evenings were a symphony of crickets and the gentle creak of the dock as I sat with a cup of coffee, watching the sky trade blue for 1,000 shades of orange and rose. I felt a deep responsibility to maintain everything as my family intended, checking the dam's spillway for cracks and clearing fallen branches from the trail that circled the water. This lake wasn't just property. It was a promise I'd made to generations past, a fragile sanctuary I vowed to protect against whatever disturbances might come. The first signs of change arrived quietly. A few survey stakes hammered into the earth at the far side of the lake, their bright orange flags fluttering like small warnings. At first, I assumed someone was marking a hiking path or measuring for a new fence, but then came the heavy trucks with their rumbling engines and the sharp scent of fresh-cut timber. A group of sharply dressed representatives from a newly formed homeowners association introduced themselves one afternoon, carrying glossy folders and smiles as polished as their shoes. They spoke of eco-luxury and sustainable development, painting a picture of 79 vacation cabins nestled around the lake's perimeter. Their words dripped with rehearsed charm, promises of increased property values, modern amenities, and a vibrant tourist economy. But behind the enthusiasm lurked a quiet arrogance. When I voiced concern about the fragile ecosystem, the nesting loons, the risk of soil erosion, they brushed me off with scripted reassurances. "We've got top environmental consultants," one said, waving a manicured hand as if to swat away my worries. What struck me most was their assumption that everyone would welcome this plan, as if my lake was merely an empty stage waiting for their grand production. I felt a chill despite the warm sun as I watched them stroll back to their vehicles, their expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path. The lake's still waters reflected their retreating silhouettes, and for the first time, I sensed the deep disturbance their project would bring, not just to the land, but to everything I had promised to protect. The quiet rhythm of the lake shattered once the construction began in earnest. At dawn, instead of the gentle murmur of loons, the air filled with the grinding roar of heavy machinery. Excavators tore into the shoreline, toppling century-old pines that had stood like sentinels since my grandfather's youth. The scent of sawdust and diesel exhaust mixed into a harsh tang that lingered over the water. Clouds of silt churned from the disturbed soil, drifting into the lake until the once clear shallows turned a murky brown. I watched helplessly as fish darted toward deeper water, and turtles abandoned their favorite sunning logs. Floodlights blazed through the night, erasing the stars and casting long, eerie shadows over the forest. Each day, more prefab cabins appeared, skeletal frames rising like weeds after a storm. The HOA's crews worked with mechanical efficiency, hammering, sawing, and pouring concrete from dawn well past dusk. I kept a meticulous record of every infraction. Photographs of runoff spilling into the lake, notes on noise levels after legal hours, measurements of unauthorized water usage. I filed complaints with the county and the environmental agency, but responses came slow and perfunctory. It was clear the HOA's money and influence smoothed over regulations faster than I could report violations. Wildlife fled in growing numbers. Herons no longer glided across the water at sunrise. Even the deer kept to distant ridges. Standing on the dock one evening, I felt a hollow ache as the lake reflected the harsh glare of construction lights instead of moonlight, a sanctuary unraveling before my eyes. Weeks stretched into months, and my battle with the HOA turned into a grinding war of paperwork and frustration. I attended every town council meeting, armed with binders of photographs and detailed notes documenting the environmental harm. silt-laden runoff, illegal nighttime construction, and unauthorized docks creeping across my waterline. Each time I spoke, a polished lawyer in a tailored suit countered my arguments with smooth reassurances, and a stack of permits I'd never seen before. Their smiles were practiced, their language drenched in legal jargon meant to stall or confuse. I filed petitions, rallied neighbors, and even consulted environmental advocacy groups, but the system moved at a glacial pace. Letters of further review arrived weeks late, often concluding that the HOA's paperwork was within compliance, despite glaring violations. The HOA president, a man with an unervingly confident grin, began boasting openly about the project's unstoppable progress, as if daring anyone to challenge him. He even had the audacity to build private docks that reached well past the property line. Their new wood glistening like a taunt each time I paddled past. Friends and family urged me to cut my losses, sell the property, escape the stress. But every time I looked at the lake, I felt the weight of generations who had cared for this place before me. Selling would mean betraying them and myself. Standing at the water's edge one evening, watching the lights of yet another cabin flicker to life, I vowed silently that I would not let their reckless ambition destroy what my family had fought to preserve. One restless afternoon, I walked the familiar trail that wound toward the old stone dam, needing the quiet to gather my thoughts. The dam had always fascinated me, a testament to my great-grandfather's craftsmanship. Its moss-lined stones fitted so precisely they seemed to breathe with the lake itself. I traced my hand along the cool rock, remembering family stories of how he'd built a hidden floodgate to handle sudden storms. Kneeling to inspect the mechanism, I found it intact. A heavy steel wheel connected to a gate that could release water in a controlled surge. My great-grandfather's journals, stored in a weathered trunk at home, confirmed what I half remembered. He had designed the system for emergencies, confident it could lower the lake safely if managed carefully and timed with the right weather. An idea began to simmer. Dangerous, yes, but undeniably possible. It wasn't sabotage if framed as maintenance, especially with the forecast of heavy rain. Technically, lowering the lake to prevent overflow was within my rights as caretaker of the dam. The thought electrified me, a flash of strategy in the gloom of frustration. I began gathering maintenance logs, recording the rising water level after the recent storms, and reviewing every guideline about dam management. Each fact I uncovered strengthened my resolve. If the HOA wanted to treat this lake like a profit machine, they had underestimated the quiet power of the structure that held it together. For the first time in months, I felt the stirrings of control, a plan forming beneath the weight of betrayal. The night before the storm rolled in, I sat on the creaking porch with a lantern flickering beside me, the lake unusually still beneath a sky heavy with bruised clouds. Hours earlier, I had listened to another evening of raucous laughter drifting from the half-finished cabins, their neon work lights throwing sharp reflections across the water. My patience, worn thin for months, finally snapped. I could no longer watch the land my family cherished rot beneath relentless noise and arrogance. The decision I'd been circling for days settled into me like a stone sinking to the lakebed, solid, irreversible. I gathered my tools with quiet precision. Heavy gloves, a flashlight, the keys to the dam's maintenance shed. Before leaving, I phoned the only downstream neighbor I trusted, a farmer named Clara whose land might be touched by a sudden drop in water level. I told her only that a heavy storm was coming, and to stay alert for a brief surge. Her calm acknowledgement steadied me. The path to the dam was slick with fallen needles, and the faint smell of rain. Wind whispered through the pines, carrying the first hints of thunder. I checked the floodgate mechanism once more, ensuring it would open smoothly. No people, no wildlife would be harmed. I had double-checked every detail. Yet my heart pounded like a war drum. Lightning forked across the horizon as I gripped the cold steel wheel. The weight of generations pressing behind my hands, and waited for the first raindrops to fall. The storm arrived with a sudden, electric fury, rain slashing through the trees as if the sky itself had split open. I stood before the dam, water spraying my face in cold, stinging bursts while the lake heaved and churned behind the stone wall. Gripping the heavy steel wheel, I forced it to turn, the metal groaning like an ancient beast awakening. At first only a trickle escaped, then a deep, resonant roar as the floodgate slid wider, and the lake's pent-up power surged forward. The sound was deafening. Thunder above, water below, blending into one relentless symphony. From my vantage point, I could see the cabin's lights flicker across the dark water. The sudden drop in level sent ripples racing toward their new docks. I imagined the confusion inside those half-finished luxury retreats as floors tilted and boats scraped bottom. The lake I had known as calm and glassy transformed into a writhing current, mud and reeds exposed where pristine shallows had been. Tree branches snapped in the wind, and lightning illuminated the scene in violent flashes. Pontoons leaning sideways, expensive wooden decks groaning under stress, a chaotic ballet of wealth meeting nature's untamed strength. My pulse hammered in rhythm with the torrent, but there was no triumphal shout, only a grim satisfaction as the water receded and the cabins, once proudly perched at the water's edge, now stood marooned in thick, sucking mud. By dawn, the storm quieted, leaving the lake a shadow of its former self, but undeniably free of the intruder's glittering dream. By the time the morning sun broke through the tattered clouds, the lake had transformed into a wide basin of glistening mudflats. Docks that once floated elegantly now lay tilted and cracked, their support beams jutting at odd angles like broken bones. The cabins, built for sweeping water views, faced only a barren expanse of damp earth where fish flopped desperately in shallow pools. Construction crews arrived first, their shouts carrying across the hushed morning as they tried to assess the damage. Soon after, the HOA president appeared, his tailored jacket spattered with rain and disbelief etched across his face. He barked orders and waved his phone, but no quick fix could refill a drained lake. When county officials finally questioned me, I presented my neatly kept maintenance records and weather reports. I explained how the storm forecast, combined with rising water levels, required an emergency release to prevent dam failure. Every word was true, every log meticulously documented. They found no grounds for penalty. In fact, a few nodded at the thoroughness of my precaution. Investors quickly lost interest as news spread of the unpredictable water levels and the cost to rebuild docks on unstable ground. The once boisterous construction site fell silent within weeks, cabins standing like stranded monuments to misplaced ambition. Gradually, the wildlife began to return. Herons stalking along the new shallows, deer venturing close to drink from restored streams. Standing on the damp shoreline, I breathed in the clean scent of pine and wet earth, knowing the lake, and my family's promise, had endured.